Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. For those of you tuning in from other places besides DC, thank you so much for joining us here today. As most of you know, my name is Adam Guarneri. I'm this year's editor-in-chief for SAIS Perspectives. And on behalf of the entire editorial staff, I wanted to welcome all of you to our Spring Career Panel event. So today we're joined by 4 SAIS grads who will share their insights in their trials and tribulations in finding work after SAIS and what they do now. So I just want to personally thank Alexis, Eli, Nenda, and Sarah for taking the time to join us here today. I think especially the anxious second years, including myself, will be looking forward to hearing your advice as we get closer to May. So we'll get started here quickly. I just wanted to briefly thank the rest of our editorial team, our 2 senior editors, Sharon and Yulia, as well as our 3 first-year editors, Zach, Simone, and Han. It's been a great year, and by the way, we are still accepting submissions, so please check out our website after the event. Our senior editor, Yulia, will be paneling the event today, and so she'll be asking our panelists a few questions, and then Sharon will have about 15 minutes towards the end of the event for Q&A from the audience. So throughout the event, I encourage all of you to utilize the Q&A chat box feature to send in your questions. And with that, I will turn it over to Yulia to start the event.
Thank you so much, Adam, and thank you everybody for being here today. We have 4 speakers, and very soon we will hear from them. And really, we wanted to gauge their opinions about the job market today, the experience of finding a job after SAIS, and what are the necessary skills in today's world to succeed. So first, we'll proceed with the introduction of our panelists. Afterwards, I'll ask a few questions that our editorial team thinks are the most interesting for our students. And then, as Adam said, Sharon will moderate Q&A. And please send the messages. And if you want to, in the Q&A chat, if you want to address the entire panel, you can just send a message. But if you want to ask a specific speaker a question about their job or their organization, please indicate so in the message. With that, I would like to introduce our panelists. First one is Eli Berger. He is a financial analyst at the U.S. International Development Financial Corporation. And also, if anybody took a project finance class at SAIS, he is our TA. So thank you, Eli. Then we have Nenda Chinda, who is an evaluation consultant at the International Fund for Agricultural Development. Thank you for being here. We also have Sarah Fund, who is a Foreign Service Officer at the US Aid, and Alexis Cleric, acting, I'm sorry if I messed up any names, but who is an acting policy director at the US Global Leadership Coalition. I would like you all to start with a little bit, tell about yourself, your jobs, and major responsibilities that you have day to day. So Eli, could you start us off? Can you please turn on your mic?
Hi everyone. Of course, thanks for having me. So I am a financial analyst at the U.S. Development Finance Corporation. It's formerly known as OPIC, and it's a small federal agency. So we invest in emerging markets, lending money to the private sector for infrastructure initiatives. So my team specifically does structured finance in infrastructure. The majority of that is in renewable energy, but we also work in highways, airports, and data centers, for example. So the goal of what we do is to lend out several $1 billion a year as a team of about 10 people. And to get to that disbursement of $10 billion per year, more or less, we have to do a few things. And essentially that's getting smart on the industry that we're investing in. If it's a renewable power plant, we would learn a lot about other power plants in the country, the industry, the key players, the macro context, any regulatory issues that we should know about. And then essentially we look at each deal, which is a power plant, imagine it's a power plant, and think about all of the risks that could possibly befall the project. And we look at it in a really holistic way. So quantitative as well as qualitative, looking at their financials, but also looking at management quality and the overall context of the country. So just being able to know all the ways that the project can go sideways requires a lot of creativity and brainstorming. So it's a team sport. That's one thing I really like about project finance is collaborating with lawyers and engineers and social and environmental consultants and anthropologists. And then if you've taken the project finance class, you know that it's then about, after you've gotten a good eye for all these risks, allocating them to different parties in the transaction. And that's where the structuring comes in for structured finance. And then in terms of what I like about the job, I sort of mentioned that we take this project that we want to lend money to, and we talk to the potential borrower, but then we turn and face our credit committees. And that's where we have to really defend the project against a panel of experts. So we really have a lot of scruples with how we lend money and who we lend money to. And that's what I like a lot about what I do, is that, you know, there's a head, but there's also a heart involved in project finance. So we're looking at the, the social and environmental impacts that these projects are having in the developing world.
Thank you so much, Eli. I like this head and heart involvement. So thank you. Nanda, could you proceed? Yes, just a little bit about your job, position, your favorite thing, and your responsibilities.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I work as a consultant at the International Fund for Agricultural Development, which is headquartered in Rome. And I work in the Independent Office of Evaluation, which basically evaluates all of IFAD's projects, and we remain independent and impartial in our processes. And I basically work on decentralization, which looks at how responsibilities are being decentralized to field offices. And we assess whether this process of decentralization and being close to beneficiaries and projects on the ground helps to improve food security for smallholder farmers. On a day-to-day basis, I do a lot of research work. So I've only been with this team since November. I used to work in another division, which Adam also worked for. So on a day-to-day basis, I conduct a lot of desk reviews. I'm responsible for about 3 countries: South Africa, Zimbabwe, and India. And it's just essentially gathering a lot of data about these countries, you know, looking at how the country offices were formed, what were the hosting arrangements, you know, what projects were being implemented when the country office was formed, and then just looking at how when the process of decentralization, which started in 2016, but which sort of accelerated in 2021, you know, we look at how that has impacted, I suppose, the efficiency of those on the ground. You know, have we made progress towards the 2030 agenda? Are we more efficient on the ground? Should more responsibilities, you know, move to local communities and leaders as opposed to being at the headquarters? So it's a really interesting, you know, process, because you can sort of, I guess, like look at the trajectory from how country offices were established, look at what didn't work then or what worked and what isn't working better, and how, you know, what sort of efforts need to go into improving the lives of smallholder farmers. And I think what I like is really similar to what Eli said. You know, everyone really has their heart in it, and everyone's really passionate about transforming smallholder farmers. And I think there isn't a better time, you know, for us to talk about food insecurity in the aftermath of COVID and climate change. And I think it's just really great to be exposed to people who are so passionate about what they do.
Thank you, Nanda. This sounds very interesting. I'll turn to Alexis. The same questions. Please introduce yourself to our audience.
Wonderful, thank you, Yulia. Hello, everyone. My name is Alexis Cleric. I am the Acting Policy Director at the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. So we're an advocacy organization. It's a coalition of around 500 businesses, NGOs, and faith community organizations who all believe that America's global leadership in the world is a force for good. And our main focus at the organization is to advocate for the international affairs budget, which is just 1% of the US federal budget, but it goes towards funding development and diplomacy programs, including the DFC and IFED and USAID. So I'm really happy to be here with these other panelists contributing to their work. So my role as acting policy director, I lead the policy team, and we're basically the think tank for the organization. We do a lot of the research, we build the materials, blogs, fact sheets, memos. We host a lot of convening calls with our board and our coalition, those 500 partner organizations I mentioned, as well as members of Congress and the administration, and including we have outreach around 35 states and advisory committees in each of those states, what we call grass tops. So we have this wide breadth of people that we get to engage with on US foreign policy, and we get to talk about what's it worth to invest in these programs that advance development and diplomacy initiatives around the world. The one thing that I really enjoy about this work is the engagement with the administration. So my team is constantly conversing with the White House, the National Security Council, the State Department, USAID, the Development Finance Corporation, Millennium Challenge Corporation, the US Trade and Development Agencies, all of these agencies that sit under what is called the 150 account, or the International Affairs Budget. And that's really interesting. And then what's great about that is the range of content. It feels like a second master's degree sometimes, because I'll be working on in any given day. Are we cooperating or competing with China? Are we doing the root causes of migration in Central America? What does agriculture look like in Sub-Saharan Africa? I've been crashing a lot on Ukraine for the last few weeks. Just completed a fact sheet on what that looks like and why this crisis about several thousand miles away is incredibly important to Americans. So I get to cover this huge range of content and to get to engage with a really interesting set of people on these topics. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexis. I don't know if anybody wants to do a second master's degree for work, but it sounds very, very interesting, a range of topics you cover. I'm going to turn it to Sarah. Can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Julia. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Fund. I graduated from SAIS in 2018 and actually left SAIS as a presidential management fellow, which is how I first got into USAID. I moved into the Foreign Service with USAID last year. I think most folks aren't super familiar, but USAID does have its own independent Foreign Service that is different from that of State Department. So getting into each is very different, although we're under sort of ambassador, chief of mission authority overseas and all of that good stuff. So it sort of looks like we do a lot of the same things. I do have to say that I am not here on behalf of USAID. I am here just in my personal capacity. Totally happy to talk to you about what I do. Also really happy to talk about how I navigated the job search during and post SAIS. I am moving for my first tour in 2 weeks, so I'm a little stressed out, but it's all going to work out. I'm headed to Kosovo, and I am going to be a program officer there, which was actually my role as a presidential management fellow as well. So program office in USAID, like probably most program offices, does a lot of strategic planning, meaning, in the next 5 years, what are we going to do in this country? Why? What's the data telling us? What do we think? Where do we think we're going to have the biggest impact? And then on the flip side, we also do the monitoring and evaluating of those programs that we do implement to make sure that they are doing what we said they were going to do, and to also make sure they're having the impact that we were hoping for. I will leave it at that and pass it back to Julia.
Thank you, Sarah. I think everybody who's on the call right now will agree that we wish you luck with moving in 2 weeks. So, and I would like to turn to the second question about how did you find your first job out of SAIS? Was it through networking? Was it an extension of the internship that you had before, like after the first year? Or was it like a cold application online, or did alumni help you? Eli, could we start with you?
Sure. So I joke with people that I applied to 100 jobs and got rejected from 99 after SAIS, or at least that's how it felt. So I got an email through a SAIS alumni newsletter someone was leaving Department of Energy on a contract and wanted to replace themselves with a SAIS grad. So I applied to the job, I think in May, and they hired someone else. And then the someone else backed out at the last minute. So I got a phone call one day on a bike ride asking if I could start in a week at Department of Energy. So I didn't even get interviewed. It was pretty lucky. But it was through the SAIS connection, and then the hiring manager called up a SAIS professor, asked if I could financial model. The professor said, well enough, and that's how I got the job.
That's amazing. I guess we all need to learn how to do financial modeling and impress our professors. Never know how it comes in handy. Alexis, could you continue?
I do not financial model. It is not the only path forward. But it is a good path and it is a very good skill set. So I do encourage it. Yeah, so I graduated in 2020, which is a really prime time to enter the job market with a global pandemic. So I went on ZipRecruiter and was like, I need a job. And I found a job doing a short-term consulting gig for the Department of the Navy in the field that I was in before SAIS. But what was great was that it gave me time to find a job that I really liked and it paid well. And so while I was there for about 6 months, and that's when I did my proper research. And I found that USGLC actually has a next gen leaders program, and I was looking into that. But I looked on their job page and I was like, oh, there's some interesting work here, including the director for Heartland. So they work in the Heartland. And I started the Heartland tour that the former American Foreign Policy Program does at SAIS. And so I took that and put it in my application and said, I am a perfect fit. And they said, no, actually, we want you to be the policy deputy director. And so that was a cold application. I didn't know anyone. I did talk to a SAIS grad who was an intern there, but he wasn't working there at the time, just to get a little bit more information about the organization. But after a few cold interviews, I got hired. And so that's how I've been here for about almost 2 years now. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Alexis. And then could you talk about your experience?
Yeah, so I think for me, it really was a stroke of luck because like Alexis, we graduated the same year and getting a job was just crazy. I mean, most of the places I applied to had stopped their recruiting, and I literally got to May and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe 2 years at SAIS, no job. But I took a course in labor markets in developing countries by Professor Matza. And off the bat of that, I remember saying to her, I was like, oh, Professor, do you think I could, do some research work for EFAD over the summer, just to keep busy and to just have something on my CV? And so luckily she reached out to one of the, so I did a paper in the course, and that paper was presented to EFAD because you had to write a paper either for the World Bank or for EFAD. And I just went with EFAD. And so she'd contacted the head of the division there and said, oh, we have someone who's willing to do some research work for you. Are you open to this? And then after about a month of, going back and forth, they said, oh yeah, sure, would like to have her, but we can't have her join if we don't pay her. And so that kind of became a formal internship. And I did that for 6 months. But then IFAD has a policy where they don't hire interns, straight after their internship as consultants. So I had to take a 6-month hiatus, come back to London. I worked for a development consulting firm. So I did that for a bit, and I was still looking for opportunities to go back to IFAD. And then when my 6 months was up, I reached out to my former supervisor and said, look, now I'm free, can I come back? And it was just a game of waiting for that opportunity, someone who had a consultancy position open. And luckily, I got a recommendation from my former supervisor, and she said, yes, there's something available, and that's how I came back. So yeah, a bit of a whirlwind, but thanks to Professor Matz's labor markets course.
That's great. Thank you. Sarah, could you talk about your experience, especially maybe about the presidential management fellowships that you mentioned? I think a lot of students would be interested.
Yeah, so the Presidential Management Fellowship, otherwise known as PMF, is something you can apply for the last year of grad school and the 2 years after that. You cannot apply anytime after that. It's not that you have a 3-year window, it's that you have that 3-year window. So it's really good to know about it. I didn't know about it coming into grad school. I actually learned about it through SAIS, which was great. And I was lucky enough to get the Presidential Management Fellowship in my last year of grad school. Essentially what happens is there's about a month when the application opens. I think it's around October sometime. You submit your application and then they'll tell you a month later whether or not you've gotten it. If you do get it, that doesn't mean you have a job. It just means you have access to a job portal that only PMF finalists have access to. Now those jobs are all federal government, except the intelligence community does not participate. I think most other federal agencies do participate. And what you do is then you then apply for the jobs on that portal that you're interested in. The PMF program is a wonderful way into the government, especially because you're hired as a civil servant or as a full-time government employee. So you get, you know, all the government benefits, the pension, all of that, and you essentially agree to work at that agency for 2 years before converting into a full-time, not full-time, you work full-time the whole time, but like a full government employee. That conversion is guaranteed everywhere but the State Department, although most folks at the State Department do end up getting a full-time job at the State Department afterwards. And it's just, there are so many opportunities that you get through the program, including there's a mandatory rotation piece. So within the 2 years that you do your fellowship, you have to rotate out of your job, either into another bureau or office at your agency or into another agency completely. So people use that opportunity to sort of figure out where they want to be in the government and what kind of work they want to do. If you're a State Department or USAID PMF, you're lucky enough to get the opportunity. Your rotation can be overseas in one of our embassies. I was supposed to go to Mozambique. COVID happened, so I didn't go. Ended up working on our COVID task force for my detail, which really, I think, launched me into the Foreign Service. So everything kind of happens for a reason. I will say I'm happy to give folks who are interested specific advice about the application if off of this call, but the PMF program is very arbitrary. Getting it doesn't, I think the 300 people who do get it every year are no different than the next 300 applicants who didn't get it. So to not get the PMF doesn't mean you aren't qualified for it. It truly means that, you know, there just aren't enough spaces. And so how they select those 300 people, I have no idea. It's not public information. So the PMF program is a great program. I don't think you can count on it to get into the government, but I think there's absolutely no reason not to apply if you are interested in the government at all, because if you get the finalist position, you still don't have to take a job. There's no requirements to do that. So if it's of interest of you because you only have those 3 years, I would highly, highly recommend looking into it. That being said, I also want to say that I think everyone on this call said that they got their jobs through stroke of luck. And I don't really think that's true. I think these are really hardworking people who network their asses off, who, you know, figure out what they want to do by talking to a lot of people. And I think everybody looks at their jobs as strokes of luck, but really kind of like what Eli said before, the job you get is the last job you're offered, because that's the job you take, right? And so, you know, you go through all of these stages to figure out where you want to be. Sometimes you might turn jobs down. Sometimes you might not get the jobs you think you want, but it really does always work out. And I could be wrong, but I also think everybody here maybe graduated without a job, that me included. I didn't get my job at USAID until after, about a month after graduation. I had already booked tickets to Argentina. I was like, I'm out of here. I don't have a job yet. Everyone says they wish they traveled after grad school. And I was lucky enough to get the job 2 days before I flew out. And I said, can I start in 3 months? And they said, yeah. So everything kind of works out in the end. And again, happy to answer more specific PMF questions off of this call.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing that. I think it's very helpful to have an inside information about how the program works. About my next question, some already of you mentioned about the skills that were important, but could you maybe talk a little bit more about what differentiated you during interview process, even if it was stroke of luck, but what are the skills, some maybe softwares that are useful to have right now on the resume, or any portfolios that maybe you submitted writing samples, or any other skills that you would recommend or you think differentiate the candidate these days? Eli, if you want to start off. Yeah.
Sure. So I guess I would again plug the hard skill for financial modeling has sort of set me apart, and especially coming from SAIS, a lot of us have liberal arts backgrounds. So I studied anthropology undergrad, and then SAIS was a transition for me. I think Anne McKenzie's on the line. So she helped me a lot with sort of framing that transition and clarifying it in a CV. So part of that, what I found useful, and it sort of violates the resume template that SAIS suggests, is having at the top just a blurb. If you look at my LinkedIn, I have a little summary of like what my training is in and why I'm interested in it and what type of work I want to do. And that was useful for me because my CV could seem a little bit jumpy. It's like, this guy studied anthropology, worked in tech, and then is trying to work in international finance. So if I just, by putting that summary up at the top, it guides them and sort of justifies the transitions that I've made and my reasons for going to SAIS and the reasons for applying to these jobs. And then also, because we are applying or competing with a lot of MBA candidates and MBAs for the jobs that we look at in project finance, having a background in anthropology is useful. Now, when I'm asked on interviews what sets me apart, I could say, oh, I'm the one guy who studied anthropology probably that you're considering. And it's useful, especially in project finance, infrastructure finance, because you're dealing with all these different participants, stakeholders that are coming from different training backgrounds. So you need to be able to talk to diplomats, lawyers, engineers, as well as like anthropologists and environmental consultants. So having that hard or softer skill from a liberal arts background, I think anyone can sort of say that on an interview, and it's useful that I can translate between these different professional registers.
Thank you, Eli. This is helpful. Yeah, so combination of soft skills and technical skills for sure. Nanda, could you continue? Maybe talk about some skills you find useful.
Yeah, sure. I think just to underline what Eli said, I mean, I read classics for undergrad, and I came to SAIS because I needed to really hone my quant skills. But I found in the job market that actually, similar to what you were saying, Eli, most people are more interested in the fact that I read classics than in my Excel skills, and that's usually the conversation starter. I mean, I remember when I was an intern, and even now as a consultant, you know, like it just sets you apart. You know, most people will have very similar educational backgrounds, professional backgrounds, and I think just having that one thing that kind of differentiates you, it's like, you know, let's interview her. Let's, you know, see what she's about. So I think for me, it's only now that I'm starting to see that it's kind of a blessing in disguise, and it sets me apart from other candidates that might have very similar portfolios. And also, I think language skills, and this is why, you know, SAIS is great. Pretty much every job application that I went through, you know, I think French was like the #1 key language. You know, I remember I got so close to World Bank research consultancy last year, and the one thing, literally, I got to the end, and the lady was like, "Oh, so about your French, what level of French do you have? And I have intermediate French, but it wasn't good enough. And literally that was it. And you know, that has come up again and again. And I think, you know, like honing your language skills, at least in this, you know, like area of international development, might not be the same for other fields, but you know, maybe my colleagues here can you know, confirm whether this is also the case. You know, I think language skills are very, very important, especially now as you know, a lot of roles and responsibilities shift from headquarters to the field. We're going to see that that's where most of the job opportunities will be. So I think, yeah, language definitely key.
Thank you, Nanda. I think now we will have motivation to do homework for language classes. I hope everybody. Alexis, can we turn to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I echo both what Eli and Nanda said. Language skills and hard skills have been fantastic. I was lucky at SAIS to take both French, Italian, and Spanish, which is a rare opportunity in a grad school program, right? I would add on the economics for me were extremely challenging, but incredibly useful. I use it pretty regularly now. I was in that TA office pretty weekly, but I got through. So I would say stick with it, learn it. Don't worry about the formulas, but think about the bigger picture of the economic applications of what you're learning. So those have been incredibly useful on a regular basis for my work. And then I would say the thing that stuck out or set me apart is working and living abroad experience. I've also been pretty lucky to live and work abroad in France, Morocco, Italy, and then in East Africa for 4 years. And I worked for One Acre Fund and lived in Kigali for 4 years. And that I think was probably the biggest differentiator. And so I would say if you have the opportunity to work or study abroad, seize it, because that is a very unique experience. And then additionally, implementing experience. So even if it's, even if you're at SAIS, I was in the Global Women in Leadership Club. Will was the president of that. And there's a lot of great implementing experience at SAIS. But also in your internships and in your job. So any chance you have to do that really tangible, building a project, building a program, seeing it through, finding what the measures are for success, and then evaluating those as you go through, that skill set is incredibly transferable. And I would highly recommend seizing opportunities to develop that implementing experience. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Alexis. Sarah, could you talk about your skill set? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I would, so I would agree that language and working abroad are actually huge in the field that I work in, or if you really even just want to work in government. I had neither of those. It was probably like my biggest regret, and I have no idea how I got through without it. And so if you're in that same situation, there is really, and you're like, oh my God, how am I going to get those? You know, it's too late. I'm in my second year of SAIS. Go abroad for 3 months after SAIS, you know, and immerse, just to learn a language, immerse yourself in a culture, immerse yourself in a language, get an internship. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And that will easily get you kind of to the place on your resume where you can feel comfortable saying, I've done this. Plus it sounds really fun. So I would highly recommend it. The one thing I will add though, this is certainly not something that OPM will say you need for the Presidential Management Fellowship Program, but I think a government internship is huge on your resume if you're interested in PMF or if you're interested in getting a job in the government after SAIS. Most of the people I know who got the PMF, whether or not they took jobs, worked in the government before. I had only had internship experience at Millennium Challenge Corporation, which is a smaller independent agency, both in the summer between my first and second year. And then I actually kept going during my second year at SAIS in Washington. I think it's essential to getting through that system and to standing out in the government interview process. When I was interviewing for my PMF job, I worked 5 years at a consulting firm, managed hundreds of thousands of dollars and a team of 10, and I did all of this work, and they wouldn't ask me about it. They would only ask me about my internship at MCC because that was the most relevant to them. So I think it's a huge step up.
Perfect. Thank you. Before I turn to our next question, I wanted to remind everybody in the audience to submit questions in the Q&A box, because after this question, we would like to turn to the audience questions. So my next question would be about remote work, and we know that it most likely will continue for us, even if there's going to be hybrid work, but it's unlikely that we'll ever fully return to office. In many instances, could you maybe comment about the effects it had on team building, networking, and mentoring, and also maybe finding opportunities for jobs? Nanda, I know that you said that you transitioned into a new position in November. Maybe you could draw on that and start us off.
Yeah, sure. I mean, definitely things have not been the same. And I think one thing I did when I did my internship at EFAD was I just tried to make the most of going into the office quite regularly. I was quite lucky in that even though there was a cap on, how many people come into the office, the house that I lived in Rome didn't have any internet. So I had to come into the office every day to work, to use the Wi-Fi. And, I would try to network with literally whoever I could find on my floor, or, go into like the database of, like who the employers are, and just see if there was anyone who was free for like a quick 10-minute Zoom call. And that's what I did for like, those 6 months. I tried to make sure that by the end of my internship, I had, a list of people that I could count on for after the internship, or people who, at least could sort of point me in a direction to go, because I knew I couldn't come back to EFAD straight after my internship. And so I needed people who could also, refer me to organizations here in London or elsewhere. And yeah, I think, LinkedIn is a great resource, and just going on LinkedIn and just finding people whose career trajectories align with yours. That I did that a lot, and that's something like one should do regardless of whether you're doing remote working. That's just an easy like message, and that's how I got a mentor actually. So my mentor currently works at the African Development Bank, and he helped me get my job after my internship at EFAD. So yeah, really, I think just a string of Zoom calls, some will work out, some will be more helpful, some won't. But that was really, really helpful for me. Was there another? I think I may have missed.
No, I think you
Did I
covered
cover
all those.
everything?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
That's helpful. Yeah, I like that you say that some will be helpful and some will be not. I think sometimes we want to every single conversation to lead somewhere, so that's a reassuring thought. Sarah, could you maybe continue with this of remote working, mentoring, how it affects team building? I know that you probably work on the ground, but a lot, but especially with Move right now, but still.
Yeah, so I think my advice is very similar in that my advice is, don't be afraid to reach out to people and just for a 30-minute coffee chat and just ask them, what they do at the organization, what they did before, why they switched, whatever, whatever you're kind of interested in. But don't be afraid, I think, is just terrible advice, because it's so unuseful if you are afraid. So I think what I would say is that if it makes you nervous to reach out to people that you don't work with or you don't know, just do one. Just do one, have a friend help you draft the email, make them hit send, and just do it. And I think it might be nerve-wracking, you might be totally terrified, but I promise you afterwards, you're going to feel far less scared than you probably did going into it. And it's going to make you say, okay, maybe I can do a second one. You just take the same email and you put the different person's name in, and eventually that kind of networking will become more natural to you. And you won't even have to think about it. And unfortunately, in a remote environment, building relationships hasn't become any less important. And so that's kind of the way you have to do it.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, sometimes we need a buddy to send hand, hit send for us. That's very helpful, like to take those steps. Eli, could you continue with this conversation?
Absolutely. So I think the points that Sarah and Nenda made are really good. That, you know, Zoom and this remote environment gives us actually some more opportunities to schedule the virtual coffee chats. I know when I was job hunting, I was so like hyper caffeinated because of those coffee chats, and it sort of became a waste of time where I'm like drinking all this coffee and like vainly telling people about my aspirations. And eventually it does bear out because you create these connections and someone will think of you one day when they need someone for a job. But yeah, cast a wide net, I'd say. Now you don't have to do coffee. You can say, hey, could I chat for 10 minutes about what I'm doing? Because what you're doing looks really interesting and I want to get a better sense of what it actually is. And then also with the virtual environment, I heard this advice recently. Assume the best of people's messages and their emails, because everyone's stressed, especially if you're working with parents right now. And they can be short in their emails and not respond to emails, and it's just easier to assume the best intentions behind them. And then in terms of LinkedIn, this is sort of my perennial piece of advice, is log in early on a Monday at like 8 a.m. on a Monday or Tuesday and go to the job posts that have been posted within the last 24 hours and just apply to those. Because you'll be on top of the stack of resumes, and oftentimes that's the most important factor, I think.
Thank you, Eli. I never heard that advice about the early Monday morning, so that's good to know. Alexis, could you speak about your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a huge advocate for hybrid work. I'm currently at the office, but that's only 2 days a week. And then those other 3 days I'm home. I have found it to be incredible. So I think this is a silver lining of everything that we've been through. I would say though it has made everything a lot harder, right? You have to be much more intentional about the experiences that you have, and that includes like getting the job, but also once you're in it and like building the trust with your coworkers. I mean, because so often trust is built through the actual work that you do, like the projects and getting things done, but it's also built through those relationships that you have, that like you bump into each other in the hallway, or you can like have a quick email that pops up, or a funny meme comes through and you can share it right away and see someone laughing in person next to you. And so if you do have the opportunity to do hybrid, if your work isn't back to full time, or if you're looking for a job, having that balance, I think, is really important. And the one tip I would say is, especially figuring out that, is like find out how people like to talk. I think Eli's point about like giving grace to people is incredibly important, but also find out how they like to communicate. I have one boss that hates Teams, does not want me to instant messenger, loves text message. I have another that says pick up the phone and call me. I do not want to text with you. And so I'm a Teams person. I'm like on chat all day, every day. So it just depends on how people like to engage. And now that we have so many more platforms for it, I think finding that out and being quite explicit about it can be really helpful. And then at last, there's, kind of take everything with a grain of salt. We're all figuring this out together, like, and trying to see like, okay, what is work remote? Like, what is hybrid? What is balance? I work way more than I did when I had a normal 9-to-5 office job. So I'm trying to figure out how do we balance that. And so I would say just give everyone a little bit of grace as well as you're figuring that path out forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Alexis. This is very helpful. This part of the panel is over. I will pass it over to Sharon to manage the Q&A session. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Yulia, for the introduction, and thank you very much, panelists, for being here. So I'm also, of course, senior editor at SAIS Perspectives, but let's start with a first Q&A. Zach asks, what would you say are the major trends or key issue areas in your field that have grown in importance in recent years that we should be aware of? I think we can start with Nenda, if you don't mind.
Sure. Oh gosh, I think climate. Yeah, that's definitely a key issue. I mean, most of the job openings I see coming through on a daily basis are, you know, like climate expert. Yeah, everything climate. I think that's a big one. That's not an area I'm very familiar with, but it is an area that myself I'm trying to get to know a bit better because you know, just looking around, that seems to be, well, it is a key issue, and that seems to be where a lot of the help is needed. So yeah, I'd say climate.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I do agree. As I'm energy resource and environment concentrate. Climate is definitely the top issue. What about Sarah? What are your thoughts about that?
At USAID, I do think it depends on what country you're in and, you know, what technical specialty you're focused on. It's climate if you're energy and environment. It's disinformation if you're governance. It's, you know, pandemic resilience if you're in health. So it just kind of depends, but I would say overall, you know, probably like cybersecurity, climate, those are the kinds of things that affect multiple industries at a time.
Absolutely. Eli, do you have any thoughts?
So I work in climate finance specifically, so it's always an issue. I think what's topical right now is spending a lot of time looking at supply chains and forced labor concerns in supply chains. Apart from that, looking at what are sort of the upcoming technologies in the market. So battery storage and hydrogen, electrolyzing oxygen into hydrogen. So I think those are some of the big trends to be aware of. And then also in development finance, 2X investment is sort of a word that I've had to familiarize myself with, and that's investing with gender equality in mind. It's a trend.
Terrific, and I do very much agree with hydrogen. I'm currently focusing on the hydrogen project for my practicum, so definitely. What about Alexis? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of my work touches this, so I have a lot of thoughts on this. And I could talk about what Eli just mentioned for days, the 2X Women Initiative at DFC. I highly recommend Googling it. It's a pretty impressive application of finances towards a gender equity issue. I would say three that are top of mind. One, and this is for development specifically, one is localization. So it's Administrator Power, who leads USAID, last November set a target of 25% of the budget will go towards assistance towards local partners specifically. Really incredible speech from last November that I recommend checking out. And so much of the financing goes to large contractors, which can be beneficial, but also there's a lot more, there's a unique value in financing going directly towards local partners in all the countries of operation for development programs. And so that's a big trend. There was a big hearing at HVAC on this yesterday. You could also check out if you're curious. Castro is leading on this. And then I would say tech and development and diplomacy. The Center for Tech Diplomacy launched at Indiana University, Purdue. And so that's been a huge, how does tech affect development? And that could be a simple example of mobile money in countries like Kenya and Tanzania, where you've skipped over kind of the brick and mortar banking systems. And now you just use your phone as your bank. And so that's a really interesting opportunity for what can tech do. Similar with solar, instead of going to like traditional grid markets, that they were just going straight to solar. And so there's some really interesting opportunities for tech in development. And then the last one I would say, importantly, and I think to the benefit in the United States, is the diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Since the murder of George Floyd, that has been just a huge uptick in the US government and in kind of the larger American sphere when it comes to diversity and equity issues. And so that is continuing to trend as a very important issue, as it should. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. Let's move to second question we received. What advice would you give to students who want to pivot to a field that it's different from the background they currently have on their resume? I think Eli is best equipped to answer this question, so if you don't mind.
So I don't know if I'm best equipped, but because I think we may share some experiences here if you've studied classics, but yeah, I think, like I said, putting something at the top of your resume that makes a case, that makes it very deliberate, and then once you're actually in an interview, being able to explain that narrative. So for me, it took me a little while to develop it, but you know, like, look at what you wrote in your grad school application. Like, why did you want to go to SAIS? And just a continuity of that logic. For me, before SAIS, I traveled in Latin America a little bit, realized that they have a lot of infrastructural bottlenecks, and I've always been interested in infrastructure because I think it's sometimes beautiful and interesting looking. And I knew that it would be a place that I could be useful in a development context. So I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an engineer, how can I be useful? And project finance was this in that I found during grad school. So I just explain how I really focused hard on gaining the skill set and how it's a logical transition from my earlier studies of anthropology and all that.
Great, thanks. I think also Nanda.
Can I add to that really quickly?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Because I did something similar where I pivoted, or I didn't have experience in the thing that I was applying for necessarily. And I think Eli is right. I think creating that little paragraph, whether you put it at the top of your resume or make it an elevator speech or use it in an interview, I think is really important. But I think a lot of people try and force it, like create the super logical, I don't know, series of events. And that's what I tried to do at first. And then I realized all I had to do was really think about what I thought as I was going through all of these things. And so I was, when I first came to DC, liberal arts education, world politics major, okay, right? I had one internship with my aunt who was a lawyer. She's a prosecutor for domestic violence victims. I worked in her office because I was like, oh, maybe I want to be a lawyer, because I think everybody at some point thinks maybe they want to be a lawyer, right? And so that has absolutely nothing to do with me being a consultant and evaluating federal education programs. But in my interview, I said, well, you know, part of my job at this internship was to call victims and remind them of their court cases. I mean, I was an admin, right? And 80% of the time they would ask to drop the case. And I'd have to explain to them that, you know, it's not them versus the perpetrator, it's the state, and so they can't drop it, blah, blah. And it made me so sad that I hated that job, because I just wanted justice for mostly these women. And I decided kind of right then and there that I didn't want to be a lawyer. I didn't want to be on the side of treating these people after something horrible has happened to them. I wanted to be on the side of prevention. And like, that is actually something I thought, I just didn't think it in those words. And so when you're coming up with your, you know, logical series of events, like, why didn't you like that internship, or why did you, and what about it can you apply to this next job? I think you don't have to stretch really hard to figure that out. You just have to think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also Nanda can, do you have anything to add about this? Because I think, you know, your background in classics.
I mean, no, I think Sarah and Eli have, you know, put it very succinctly. You know, I think for me, it's about like finding that issue or that problem you want to solve and just really running with it. And, you know, being okay to say, you don't have very much experience with this, but you want to, you know, you want to contribute something to this area. You know, for me, I mean, pivoting from classics to international relations, I think whenever I get stuck, whenever I don't know how to kind of change course, you know, that process of going back, you know, like, how did I get from point A to B? How did I transition in the past? And, you know, what was the thinking that I had? You know, what motivated me? And how did I overcome these hurdles? I think that still helps me now, just thinking about that, you know, like when you like Eli said, when you put together your statement of interest, you know, like what was the problem you wanted to solve, and you know, how did you communicate that passion? And I think that's something that helps me each time. So yeah.
Thank you very much. I would ask this question. Is, you know, what is one thing you do outside of work to keep work-life balance, especially in these times of hybrid work and burnout? Alexis, do you want to start?
Sure, seeing as I alluded to this earlier. Yeah, absolutely. Organized sports have been huge for me, because signing for the gym is like, yeah, I'll go. But if you have organized sports, even if it's just like a fun club, there's a kind of a larger obligation to go. So I play a lot of ultimate frisbee here in the DC area. I love it. It's super fun. It's social, and it's a really good workout. And now it's like, okay, I have to stop working at 7 p.m. I have to go to my game. And it's kind of this, I build in forced mechanisms to make me stop working. And that's similar with like socializing with friends, or getting out of town. As long as I have those kind of accountability mechanisms that I've put into place, then I will force myself to have some balance.
Really? Does anyone else want to give a shot answering this question? Maybe Sarah?
I probably am not the best person to answer, but I think to Alexis's point, like it's kind of on you, right? To create your boundaries, talk to your manager, get your work done in the time you're given. And if it's too much, then figure out why, or figure out if it's temporary, if it's permanent, right? I think that there's not gonna, if you're feeling burned out, I think there's not going to be anyone who advocates for you, really. There could be, and that would be great. But I would advocate for yourself and create your own boundaries. Or find the methods that work for you, like joining a sports team. All of those things are super valid, but you've got to do that for yourself.
Very good. Let's move to another question. So have you noticed if there have been changes in job opportunities abroad since the start of the pandemic? Who wants to take this question?
So is that about job opportunities in foreign countries?
I think that is the question, yeah.
I haven't been job hunting as much recently. I was a year and a half ago. And I absolutely noticed that they weren't hiring for international posts at the time. But I think the trend is that that's changing now. And we're very gingerly going back to a world where we have international posts. I think Sarah might have a better view on that.
Yeah, I can say that during the pandemic, the Foreign Service at State and Aid said this is actually proving to us why we do need people overseas for lots of different reasons, because it's not always going to be a global issue. Sometimes it's a local or a regional one, and having people there who have the real context, who can speak the language, who can tell us in Washington what is actually going to have an impact, that's the most important. And so in some ways, the pandemic actually reinforced the need for the Foreign Service, but probably local staff in general. I think too that, yeah, job opportunities totally did decrease, because no one's going to send people overseas where maybe there's a risk of being isolated or healthcare not being available, of course. But that, like Eli said, is going to change. I mean, Peace Corps is just going back this month, right? And I had a Peace Corps person last month tell me, oh, it'll be 5 years, right? It's not going to be 5 years, where you're starting to see companies put reentry plans to go back into the office, whether full-time or hybrid. You know, that's all coming. So it's unfortunate. Yeah, you guys are job searching in totally kind of precarious, uncertain time, but it's better than the class last year.
Absolutely. I think let's move to another question, and I'll try to add a little bit more to that to the question that one of the students asked. Can any of you talk about the key steps that international students need in visa support, but also, are there any positions in one of your organizations open to international students, to internationals in general? Perhaps, I mean, IFAD for sure, but I think would be helpful to know, even if in government organizations there's place for internationals. Does anyone want to take a shot? I think Nanda can talk.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely at IFAD, it's staff come from everywhere, and it's an international organization. So by its very nature, people are recruited from all over the world. The internship, for example, there are two types of internships. If anyone was thinking of doing an internship, you have the normal internship and you have the enhanced internship. I think that's what it's called, enhanced or advanced internship, which basically pays you a bit more because they factor in, coming from another country and needing more travel or accommodation allowance. So you get paid a bit more compared to the regular internship for people recruited, locally in Italy. So that's something that we have in place. IFAD also, like other international organizations, they have these JPOs, so junior professional officers, and that's sponsored through various governments. So sometimes it's only limited to citizens of that specific country, but most times, like say the German government will require people from X amount of countries, usually developing countries that are underrepresented. So that's always something to keep an eye out for, junior professional officer positions.
Terrific. Does anybody else have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in here. So for the visa elements, I mean, the SAIS office that works to support this is incredible. So if you haven't had a chance to talk to the SAIS Careers office, and specifically for international student support, that I would highly recommend that. I'm American, so I haven't had to go through this, but I have plenty of friends that were international and found there are specific visas, especially for right after you graduate SAIS, that you can stay in. If you're in the US, you can stay in the US for, I think it's 1 or 2 years, but they'll have all the details on that. And then for later on, I can only speak to it. My husband is Dutch and he's going through the green card process, and there's a lot of steps there. So happy to talk offline if that's of interest. But it's a lengthy process, and if you're interested in U.S. government, I think almost all the positions are U.S. citizen. So that's a bit of a longer process there. But there's a lot of larger contracting firms that maybe work tangential to the U.S. government or work in development at large, and those often don't have the same citizenship requirement. So that's a good alternative to seek out.
Terrific. Let's move to another question. Do your respective organization recruit middle to senior level professionals through external paths instead of internally promoting existing staff? What is your take on that? And is there a specific organizational policy around this? Who wants to chime in?
I could start just because it's a simple answer. As a US agency, we don't recruit. And we also only hire US nationals. As far as I understand it, that's the majority of the jobs, the vast majority. And generally there's federal jobs within the federal government, and then there's contractor jobs within the federal government. And contractors can fall under a few different structures. But I worked at Department of Energy through a job that I was just, like I mentioned, sort of cold called about. So didn't go through USA Jobs. The contracting agency called Jones Lang LaSalle had the contract, so it was super easy for them to hire me. And in fact, Department of Energy didn't have a say in whether I was joining because I was on this contract.
Yeah, I would add, I mean, very similar to Eli, but USAID is, I don't know the statistic, but it is largely contractors, especially in Washington. And you can work as a contractor directly for a US institution, or you can do what Eli did, which is work for a different company and they place you at USAID or DFC or what have you. The only pathway that I know of into the US government is PMF and things like Payne Fellowship or Pickering Fellowship, but those two you have to have before grad school, so I can't really speak to any others.
Yep, absolutely. That has been very helpful. Maybe we can, I'll just ask you if you can say final remarks and advice so we can wrap up. Maybe we can start with Nanda. Do you have any final remark or advice to our students trying to find a job?
Breathe and all will go well in the end. It just always works out and you find yourself doing what you're meant to be doing and where you're meant to be. I know that sounds very, very cliche and very cheesy, but honestly, like if I think back, it's coming to 2 years now since we graduated at Lexus, and I remember how like stressed and confused and just all the emotions, but just somehow it works out, and it works out at the right time, you know, things just align. And so I'd say, yeah, definitely breathe and just do what you can, you know, just make sure you've exhausted all your you know, resources. With the Zoom and LinkedIn chats, I think at some points there's like diminishing utility, if I remember the economic word correctly. You know, don't do too many that you get burnt out and exhausted. I think at some point it stops being useful, you know, talking to that many people. So just, you know, definitely like quality over quantity, just identify, you know, what you need to do, who you need to talk to, and then just give it time. And I think be comfortable with the unknown a bit, you know, like I think everyone is suffering from some kind of PTSD, you know, with COVID and all of that, and it's really stressful. We're all burnt out. We all have Zoom fatigue, and I think it's okay to just kind of allow for that, you know, not knowing what might happen next, but just, you know, like taking those baby steps and just doing what you need to do to get to the next point. I think that's really my final 2 cents.
Great advice, thank you. What about Alexis? Do you have any final advice, remarks?
Sure. Keep going. You're doing great. I also agree with Nana. Try not to stress too much. I would say 2 things more specifically. One, just like soak it up. It just goes by so quickly. And like, I love where I am now, but I loved my time at SAIS. Like, it was a really, really fun, really challenging opportunity. And so kind of like lean into the clubs, the classes, and like, especially I would say, I wish I had spent more time talking to SAIS careers, like my professors, my TAs, my fellow students, like as much as you can have those conversations. And while you have access to all of these people, really engage with them as much as possible. Thanks.
Great. Sarah, do you want to add anything else to the discussion?
Yeah, I would say your first job out of SAIS is not your last. So don't panic. If your first job after SAIS is one of those things on your continuum of, oh, well, if I didn't take this class or meet this person or go online at this time, then I wouldn't have, you know, or eat this food, like I wouldn't have gotten this job that I have today, right? Everyone's got one of those. If your first job out of SAIS happens to be a part of that, great. You know, every single one of my SAIS friends, I think I can say that pretty confidently, has changed jobs now. And I only graduated 2.5 years ago, including myself. So, you know, your first job is the place that hopefully helps get you to where you want to be, whether or not it's because you like it or you hate it. So don't panic. Like everyone said, you don't have to have a job the day of graduation. I didn't know language. I didn't have a job. I had like 10 weeks of international experience and I got where I wanted to be. So it just, you just work hard, you network, and you do what you got to do.
Great. Eli, do you have any final advice?
Sarah just got me thinking that, try to enjoy the time after graduating before you've gotten a job. And no one's going to listen to that because it's easier to say than to do. But I sure wish I did. I remember feeling like really existentially threatened right after SAIS. Like, what am I going to do? But everybody gets a job. Some friends, they took a really long time to get jobs, but everybody I know got a really cool, interesting job. And you just have to have faith that you'll be included. So don't stress.
Terrific. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for these insights, and it has been very helpful. I can say it on behalf of the editorial team and the students. So thank you very much, everyone. And let me just advertise our publication. You can find more details at saisperspectives.com. We have a new theme, disparity in development. If you have any interesting articles or blogs, you can submit those. And thank you very much, everyone. This has been such a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for organizing.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you